Hello, my name's Elizabeth Conley from Interview Skills Clinic. If you've come across this video, then I'm guessing that you are having a civil service interview. Now, in this video, I'm going to be answering some of the more precise questions that people have asked at the end of some of our other videos. Now, if this is the first video you've come across, then it probably is worth going back, or after watching this video, going back and having a look at some of our other videos. So the ones I recommend are how to answer the tell me about yourself question. This is as relevant for civil service interviews as it is for any other interview. How to write a civil service behaviour. Applications still require behaviour, 250 word behaviour examples. And I talk a little bit about how to prepare that. At more senior levels, applications have moved across more towards personal statements, but there's still a combination of both approaches being used. There is then the video, How to Ace a Civil Service Interview. This covers a real background into what Success Profiles is about and what to expect in your interviews and how to prepare. And then we have the very precise video on how to answer strength questions. So all of those are worth looking at. Now, if you are not familiar with Success Profiles, it is a blended assessment approach. Now, one of the questions that I got asked, which show that not everybody's fully understanding the difference now between the old civil service or the approach that's used in Ireland and in Scotland, which is the competency-based approach, and the approach that's used in England, which is Success Profiles, which is this blended assessment. Because the question that I got asked is, if I'm understanding it correctly now, when I go for interview and say, for example, I have 7 questions, are all of my 7 questions going to be strength-based questions? And the answer is, no, probably not, or maybe. And the thing is, I don't know, because the difference between the blended approach is that it's up to the hiring manager to decide how they're going to assess their candidate. Now, they can use a combination of 5 techniques. So behaviour questions, they can assess you on your ability. That can be done through tests and presentations. Strength-based questions, which are the 36 strengths that we talk about. Technical questions, they have a lot of technical profile, own competency frameworks that they use for both communication skills, project management, design, but a wide range of different frameworks that they used for the technical questions, and then experience-based questions. So they can really choose what they want, and you have to look at the job specification. And in the job specification, there will be a job description with the criteria and the required criteria and the desired. But underneath that, it will say we are assessing you using Success Profiles, and we are assessing you on behaviours and experience, or we're assessing you on strengths, behaviours, and experience. All right. So it really does depend on each job specification. If you're putting in an application, please download and keep the job specification, because that's the information that you want. If you have an interview coming up and you haven't got that, then you need to email your contact in HR in order to get another copy of it, because you need that information in order to prepare properly. If you are having a combination, so if the application has said to you that you are having a combination of behaviours and strength questions, then you know the areas that the strength questions will focus on, because they're based on the behaviours. So let me give you an example of that. If you have, just to clarify, you've got on the last page, so you can Google it and type in Civil Service Strength Dictionary, and you'll find the 36 strengths that we're talking about. On the very, very last page, you will see that each of the 9 behaviours are listed. So we've got seeing the bigger picture, making effective decisions, communicating and influencing, developing self and others, delivering at pace, changing and improving, leadership, working together, and managing a quality service. Now, let's say that you have been told that you are going to be assessed on 3 behaviours, which is not unusual in your interview: making effective decisions, leadership, and working together. Okay, so you now need to go and have a look at that. And underneath on the last page on working together, it will say to you, challenger. emotionally intelligent, inclusive, a negotiator, a networker, a relationship builder, a team builder. These are all the strengths that have been aligned to that behavior. So if you are going into an interview and you're being asked a behavior question on working together, then they are going to, at some stage in that interview, probably at the end, ask you a strength-based question. They'll ask one strength-based question usually for each behavior, and they will choose that strength from the list that they give in the strength dictionary. If, on the other hand, you have got developing self and others, then we can see that the strengths are an enabler, an explainer, inclusive, and a learner. All right. So whilst you don't know the specific question, i.e. how that question might be phrased, you do know that you are likely to get a question. We've got inclusive there. Does being inclusive come naturally to you? Would other people describe you as inclusive? So they can ask the question in different ways, but the questions aren't really that challenging. It's more that they're focusing on those strengths. So I hope that sort of answers that question. And so you really need to prepare for both behaviour and strength questions. Now, the other comment that I want to cover, because I think it's not really correct, I can see where it's coming from, but it's not actually correct, is that behaviour questions are nothing like, tell me about a time when you. That's the old style of civil service interviews. You're meant to answer the scenario-based question and then back it up with an example as an add-on where possible. That's actually not correct. Behaviour questions in the main will still start with, can you give me an example? Can you tell me about a time? There will be, and there can be, some questions that will say to you, let me just find some of those questions for you, that will say something, or may start in a slightly different way. It won't be a scenario-based question, but it might say to you, let me have a look at decision-making. If I look at decision-making, how do you go about developing the information to make a decision? Okay, that's not asking you specifically for an example. You still need to give an example, even though they've asked it to you in a how way, but you need to answer the how bit first and talk about how you would go about it. You know you would do this because let me share an example with you. So behaviour questions need one example in order to get the full marks. Another example of that would be, how do you ensure knowledge is managed and shared with your team? Again, that's a how-to. You would answer the how, but you would still share that and back that up with an example. So I think what this person is referring to when they talk about scenario-based questions are what we call really situational-based questions, which can be used for experience-based questions. So if you remember, I talked about the blended approach under success profiles, where you can be assessed on behaviours, strengths, ability, experience. So for that experience or ability, they could ask you a situational based question where they are giving you a scenario and then asking you how you would deal with that. I still think for those scenario-based questions, I'm going to cover those in a separate video because they use quite a lot for entry-level roles and for graduate roles. It's still important to say, I can give you an example. I know this, so when you've talked about how you would do it, you would then say, well, I know this because it's very similar to what happened. Would you like to hear the example? And they're likely to say yes. They also, scenario or situational based questions can also be used for strength based questions, particularly if you only have a strength based interview. So if on the job spec, it says you're only going to be assessed on experience and strength based questions, then again, they could use these scenario-based questions, all right? But they are not behaviour questions. So if you have got an interview for a behaviour interview, you will not be asked behaviour questions, in my experience. Okay, I have a strength-based interview for an immigration enforcement officer role. Can you predict what type of questions they'll ask? Yes, we can. I mean, that's what we do as coaches. but we need to see the job specification. So what we do when a client comes to us for interview coaching, they will send us the job specification, and once we have that job specification, we will probably spend anything up to half an hour looking in, depending on the level of the role and how complex it is, looking at what we think they're likely to ask and where their priorities are for this particular interview. We will send some areas that questions would be asked, not necessarily the specific question, because we obviously don't know the specific question, but the where we think the questions might be and what the questions might sound like and where we've heard similar questions. But we'll also be asking you not to prepare for a specific question, because we actually believe it's very important to prepare flexibly for these interviews. But we can predict what is likely. So an example of that is if the role is talking that you're going to have for the candidate in this role, you are going to be engaging with lots of different stakeholders. Then if you have got working together as one of your behaviours, then we would probably predict some of the working together questions that are going to be about managing stakeholders who've got different agendas and how you build consensus. If, on the other hand, you are not going to be working a lot with multiple stakeholders, but you are managing your own team much more, then the question on working together, I would probably predict it to be more about how you have built collaboration within the team, because working together is all about collaboration and getting people to work well together. So I think they would focus more on that, but we can't really tell until we see that job specification. But and then when you do that in the first coaching session, we share first of all our own formats with you about how we like you to prepare, and you then come and have a coaching session with us. We listen to your answers, and at the same time we're checking the level that you are of your example. Is it the right level? Is it likely to pass the grade for the different levels within the civil service, like EO, HO, G6, G7, etc. And also how flexible, how can you adapt that example? How broad is it? And then we start sharing some of maybe more unlikely questions that might come up, or some of the more challenging questions. And the higher you go, the more challenging the questions. And from there, we can see what you're doing well, what you're not doing so well. You would go away and work on that. We video record the session, and then we would come back and have a mock interview coaching session. So it's quite an intensive process. If you're not having coaching, can you do it yourself? You can just try to really read in depth about the criteria, who they say they want, what you're going to be doing in the role. So if, for example, you haven't got working together, but you can see within the role that there is going to be a lot of working in teams, then that's likely to come up. It's in another question, another behaviour question, but they might fit it in. So for an example of that, if for example, we can see in the job spec, or you've seen in the job spec, that there's a lot of sort of working with lots of different teams and collaborating, but they haven't specified that you're going to be asked working together, but you're going to be asked making effective decisions, then maybe when they ask you the making effective decision question, they will ask you about when you've had to make a recommendation or a decision when other people, other stakeholders might have been resistant to that decision. So they'll weave in that working together aspect from the job spec into one of the other behaviours. I hope that makes sense. I know it gets a little bit complicated, but I wanted to try and answer all those questions for you. If you'd like to, please like this video, share it with other people that you know who are having a civil service interview. That would be fantastic. And of course, add your questions.